Hi, and welcome to section 2. In this section, we'll be learning about advanced Python functions. In this lecture, we are going to discuss about classes, objects, and functions. Going forward, we'll be covering the following topics. What are classes and objects? What are functions and how to create one? And what are the different ways of using arguments inside a function? Before we go ahead, I want you to understand that this lecture is mainly focused on functions and how to use the different arguments. The classes and objects section will be just an overview of what are classes and objects. So let's move ahead. So what are classes and objects? Classes are user-defined data types that help a user to define a set of properties and functions as per their own wish. A class consists of data members and functions. By data members, we mean variables. An object is an instance of a class. We basically access and manipulate a class by instantiating an object. This means that in order to use the different data members and functions of a class, you need to instantiate its object. Let's move on to the code section. So here, as you can see, I have created a class with a function double value. So this class has member function double value. What it does is, it takes the input and doubles its value. Here I have to instantiate a class. You call the constructor of the class. Since I have not defined any constructor, this is the default constructor of a class. The class name followed by parenthesis. So my object is an object of class with function. Then I call function double value using the object my underscore obj dot double value and pass 5 as input. So this 5 goes here and you can see 5 into 2. The whole purpose of self keyword is to tell Python that you need to use the current instance of the class which has called this function. Think of it as the this keyword in Java. For all the functions inside a class, you need to add self parameter always. So here I have defined a class with two members x and y. So this is the signature of a constructor in Python. So the constructor is used as double underscore init double underscore. So this is how you define a constructor for any class. So here I take the two values 3 and 7 and create two members x and y. So x is assigned as a and y is assigned as b. So these are different functions perform operations on the data members like double the values of x and y, add to x, add to y, and this function prints the value of x and this function prints the value of y. So let's see these functions. So here I have printed the values of x and y. These are the original values. Then I have called the function double xy, which doubles the value of x and y, and then get x and get y. So as you can see, the values have doubled. Let's call other functions. So as you can see, I have added 9 to x. So 9 plus 6 becomes 15. Then minus 7 to 14. So 14 becomes 7. So this is how you create classes with different members and functions. So the constructor is defined as double underscore init double underscore. And always remember to include the self keyword when defining functions inside classes. Next, move on to functions. So a function is basically a group of statements that perform a specific task. They help us to break down the programming logic into smaller modular chunks. This helps us to manage the code easily. Also, this improves the reusability of the code. So if you define a block of statements or a function that you require more than once, this will help you to reduce the size of the code. One thing to understand here is that Python functions use a concept called call by object reference. So let's move on to the code to understand what exactly is this. So as you can see here, I have defined this function my underscore func, which takes the value x as input. So in the previous lectures, we had used the id function. So what id function does is it returns the unique id of the object in memory. So remember that int is immutable type. Okay, so let's understand what call by object reference means. So call by object reference basically means that if the argument passed is immutable in nature, Python will use call by value. Else, if the object is mutable, Python will use call by reference. So in this case, integer is immutable. So initially the ID was 00856, the last 5 digits. Then I called my underscore func with x as input. So inside the function, it was still same. As soon as I added something to it, the ID changed. It became 00808. Then outside the function call, it still remained intact. 00856. So this phenomena is called call by object reference. Let's take an example for mutable types. So as you can see here, this is another function my underscore func from mutable. So here what I do is I pass a list and append 4 to it. This is somewhat similar to the previous function that we made. It prints the ID of my list before and after making change to it. So the original list was 135. So before the function call, the ID was 75832. So as you can see here, I have defined the function func underscore sample with 3 arguments, argument 1, 2 and 3. So what exactly does this mean is for required arguments that the correct positional order that is to be maintained, that is this order should match exactly this order. So suppose that I need the third argument to be of string type, then the third argument when the function call has to be string type. Also, I cannot pass less arguments than the one defined in the function call, else it will throw me an error. So the first argument is mapped to 1, second to 3 and the third to hello world. Next come keywords argument. So we can change the position of arguments, but the exact number of arguments should remain same. So as you can see here, so in the function call, I have defined which argument is which instead of just passing them directly. So argument 1 is equals to 1, argument 3 is hello world, and argument 2 is 3. So even though the order is a little different, it is mapped correctly. So these are keyword arguments. So the order can change, but exact number of arguments should remain the same, else it will throw an error. Next, come to default arguments. So we can define arguments with default values, allowing us to call a function with reduced number of arguments. So as you can see here, I've defined the default value of argument 3 to be hello world. So when I make the function call, with the first argument as 1 and second argument as 3, and without even defining the third argument, the default value is passed. Always ensure that the default argument is the last one in the sequence of arguments. You can override this default value as well, like say like this. So the hello world is overwritten and the YOLO is passed in place of argument 3, or you can leave it all together. Another thing to note here is that you can combine multiple techniques into one. So here one is passed as required arguments. This is using keyword arguments, and the third argument is default one. So you can combine these techniques inside your program. So let's move on to the final one, variable length arguments. So these allow us to define variable length arguments. We use star for variable length arguments and double star for variable length keyword arguments. So let's see in the code. So here I've defined a function with variable length arguments. So this is the notation. So this basically compresses all the arguments into a list and passes it. So you iterate over the list and you can see the arguments. Let's see what are variable length keyword arguments. So as you can see here, I've defined a function with variable length keyword arguments. So this is the notation: double star keyword arguments. Then I iterate over the keys in the dictionary and then print the key and value. So this is how you pass the arguments inside the function. So basically you define a variable length sequence of arguments, but in keyword style, like here. So you basically pass the keyword and then its value. So here I've defined argument 1 as 1, argument 3 as hello world, and argument 2 as 3. So when I pass this inside here, this is compressed into a dictionary, and then you access the keys and values. So the key is the argument, say arg1, arg2 and arg3, and this is the value. So 1, hello world, and 3. So a quick recap of what we have learned here. Classes are user defined data types with data members and functions. By data members we mean variables. Objects are instances of classes which help us to manipulate the various data members and use the classes functions. Functions are basically a block of statements which perform a specific task. Functions in Python use the concept of call by object reference. This means if the passed argument is immutable in nature, Python will refer to it as call by value. If the argument is mutable in nature, it will be call by reference. A function can have the following types of arguments: required arguments, keyword arguments, default arguments, and variable length arguments. You can also have more than one type of arguments in the same function.